A Christmas to Remember by Harper Elwood. The small New England town of Snowberry Hollow nestled in a valley surrounded by towering pines dusted with the season's first snow. In the year 1875, the world outside might have been moving quickly, but within the town, time seemed to slow. The flickering glow of candle-lit windows and the sound of bells in the distance created an air of tranquility, as if Christmas had settled upon Snowberry Hollow like a soft blanket, bringing with it a sense of peace and joy. This cold December day, Eleanor Finch sat in front of the crackling fire in the parlor of her family's inn, watching the snow fall gently outside the frosted windows. The inn, known as Finch's Hearth, had been in her family for generations, and Eleanor had taken over its management when her father passed away a few years earlier. At 27, she was accustomed to the steady rhythm of running the inn, especially during the holiday season, when travelers passing through often stopped for a warm meal and shelter from the biting winter wind. Eleanor loved Christmas, the scent of pine wreaths hung by the mantel, the aroma of fresh bread baking in the kitchen, and the twinkling lights strung through the village square always filled her heart with warmth. But this year felt different. Though the inn bustled with guests, her heart ached with a quiet loneliness she couldn't shake. As she gazed out the window, her mind wandered to memories of Christmases past. She remembered the laughter that once filled these rooms, the way her father's eyes would squint when he smiled, and how her mother's voice would ring out as she sang carols while decorating the tree. Now, with her father gone and her mother living with her sister in a nearby town, the inn felt emptier somehow, despite the constant flow of guests. It had been 2 years since Charles Granger Grade left for Boston. He had been the only man who had truly captured her heart, and she had never forgotten him. Charles had been an architect with grand dreams of building the future, and when an opportunity arose to move to the city and work on a new project, he had taken it. He had asked her to come with him, but Eleanor couldn't abandon the inn or her ailing mother. She had watched him leave, unsure if she had made the right decision, and though she hadn't heard from him since, she often found herself thinking of him, wondering if he thought of her, too. Eleanor sighed, pushing away from the window and straightening her apron. There was work to be done, and she couldn't afford to dwell on the past. The inn was nearly full, and she had promised her guests a special Christmas Eve dinner. As she made her way to the kitchen, the familiar scents of cinnamon and nutmeg greeted her, along with the hustle and bustle of the staff preparing for the evening meal. "Miss Eleanor," called out Mrs. Abernathy, the cook who had been with the inn since before Eleanor was born. "I've just pulled the pies from the oven. Would you care to taste them?" Eleanor smiled, grateful for the distraction. "Of course, Mrs. Abernathy, I'm sure they're delicious as always." As she sampled the warm, flaky crust and the sweet filling, Eleanor felt a spark of the Christmas spirit she had been missing. The inn may have changed, but some things remained constant: the comfort of tradition, the warmth of good food, and the kindness of those around her. The rest of the afternoon passed in a flurry of activity. Eleanor checked on the rooms, ensuring each was warm and welcoming for the guests. She helped string garlands along the staircase and place candles in each window, their soft glow a beacon of warmth against the gathering darkness outside. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the snow-covered ground, Eleanor heard the distant sound of sleigh bells. A carriage was approaching, likely carrying last-minute guests seeking shelter from the cold. She smoothed her hair and straightened her dress, preparing to greet the newcomers with the hospitality for which Finch's Hearth was known. The door to the inn swung open, letting in a gust of icy wind. Eleanor stood quickly, moving to greet the newcomer. She paused mid-step, her breath catching in her throat. Standing in the doorway, brushing snow from his coat, was Charles Granger. Eleanor blinked, unsure if her mind was playing tricks on her. But there he was, tall, broad-shouldered, and looking much the same as he had when she last saw him. His dark hair was dusted with snow, and his blue eyes, always so full of light, fixed on her with a look that made her heart skip a beat. "Charles," she whispered, hardly able to believe her eyes. "Eleanor," he said softly, stepping forward and closing the door behind him. The warmth of the inn enveloped him, but it was the sight of her that seemed to bring color to his cheeks. "I didn't expect to see you so soon." Eleanor felt her heart race, but she kept her composure, hands folded neatly in front of her. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside her. "I've come home," Charles replied simply. His eyes held hers for a long moment before he glanced around the inn, taking in the familiar surroundings. "I thought I might stop by Finch's Hearth for old time's sake." Eleanor tried to suppress the flutter of hope in her chest. "You didn't write," she said, more quietly this time, her eyes searching his for an answer. "I thought you were gone for good." Charles stepped closer, the familiar scent of pine and cold air clinging to him. "I know, and I'm sorry. Life in Boston," he trailed off as if searching for the right words. "It wasn't what I expected. I thought I would find everything I was looking for there. But the truth is, Eleanor, I realized too late that what I wanted wasn't a city or a grand career. It was you." Eleanor's breath caught, and she turned away slightly, her mind reeling. She had imagined this moment 100 times, had pictured what it would be like if Charles ever returned. But now that he was here, she didn't know what to say. Charles watched her carefully, his voice softer now. "I thought of you often. Every day, in fact. But I didn't know if you'd still want to see me after all this time." Eleanor glanced up at him, her heart aching with all the unanswered questions. "Why didn't you come back sooner?" He sighed, running a hand through his snow-dampened hair. "I thought I needed to make something of myself first, that I had to become the man I thought you deserved. But the longer I stayed away, the more I realized that none of it mattered without you. I'm sorry, Eleanor. I should never have left you behind." The fire crackled behind them, and the soft sound of carols from the village square drifted through the air, mingling with the scent of pine. Eleanor felt a tear slip down her cheek, though she quickly wiped it away. For a moment neither of them spoke, the weight of the past 2 years settling between them like the snow outside. But then Charles took her hand, his touch warm and familiar, and it was as if no time had passed at all. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said softly. "But I had to see you. I had to tell you that I'm here now, and I'm not leaving again. Not unless you tell me to." Eleanor looked down at their joined hands, her heart swelling with emotions she hadn't let herself feel in so long. She had been so afraid of holding on to the past, but now, standing here with Charles, she realized that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. "You hurt me," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I know," he replied, his voice filled with regret. "And I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you'll let me." Eleanor met his gaze, searching his face for any sign of doubt, but all she saw was the same sincerity she had known years ago. The Charles she had fallen in love with had never truly left her, and though the past couldn't be undone, the future lay before them like a fresh blanket of snow, untouched and full of possibilities. After a long pause, Eleanor gave a small nod, her lips curving into a soft smile. "I think I'd like that." Charles exhaled, his shoulders relaxing as if the weight of the world had been lifted from him. "Does that mean you'll give me another chance?" Eleanor squeezed his hand gently. "It means I've missed you more than I can say." A smile broke across Charles's face, and for the first time in what felt like forever, Eleanor felt her heart lighten. The ache she had carried for so long seemed to melt away like snow under the sun, replaced by a warmth she hadn't thought possible. As they stood together in the glow of the fire, the sound of laughter and music filling the air, Eleanor realized that Christmas had always been a time of hope and renewal. And this year it had brought her the greatest gift of all, a love lost and found again. The moment was interrupted by the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Eleanor quickly composed herself, remembering her duties as the innkeeper. "I should get back to work," she said, reluctantly releasing Charles's hand. "We have a full house tonight, and there's still so much to do for the Christmas Eve dinner." Charles nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course. Is there anything I can do to help?" Eleanor hesitated for a moment, then smiled. "Actually, yes. Would you mind helping me decorate the dining room? We could use an extra pair of hands." "I'd be honored," Charles replied, his eyes twinkling with the same enthusiasm she remembered from years ago. As they worked side by side, hanging wreaths and arranging centerpieces, Eleanor found herself stealing glances at Charles. He looked older, more weathered perhaps, but his smile was just as warm as she remembered. They fell into an easy rhythm, working together as if no time had passed at all. "Tell me about Boston," Eleanor said as they hung a garland over the fireplace. "What was it like?" Charles paused, considering his words carefully. It was different. Exciting at first. The buildings were taller, the streets busier. I worked on some impressive projects, a new library, a grand hotel. But as time went on, I realized something was missing. "What was that?" Eleanor asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Home," Charles said simply, his eyes meeting hers. "The sense of community, the quiet moments, the people I cared about." Eleanor felt her cheeks warm under his gaze. She turned back to her task, arranging a bowl of pine cones and holly berries. "Snowberry Hollow has changed too, you know. We have a new schoolhouse, and Mr. Thompson finally retired from the general store." Charles chuckled. I never thought I'd see the day. Who runs it now? His daughter, Sarah. She's modernized the place, even has a telephone now. They continued to work and talk, catching up on the years they'd missed. Eleanor told him about her father's passing, about taking over the inn, and about the challenges she'd faced. Charles listened intently, offering words of comfort and admiration for her strength. As the evening wore on, guests began to filter into the dining room, exclaiming over the beautiful decorations. Eleanor reluctantly left Charles to attend to her duties, greeting guests and ensuring everything was perfect for the Christmas Eve dinner. The meal was a success, filled with laughter, good food, and the warmth of holiday cheer. Eleanor moved from table to table, making sure everyone was comfortable and happy. Every so often, her eyes would meet Charles's across the room, and she'd feel a flutter in her chest. As the night drew to a close and the guests retired to their rooms, Eleanor found herself once again alone with Charles in the now quiet dining room. The candles had burned low, casting a soft, intimate glow over the space. "Thank you for your help tonight," Eleanor said, gathering up the last of the dishes. "I don't know how I would have managed without you." Charles took the dishes from her hands, setting them aside. "Eleanor," he said softly, "I need to tell you something." She looked up at him, her heart quickening. "Yes? I didn't just come back to Snowberry Hollow on a whim. I came back for you. These past 2 years, I've realized what truly matters in life. It's not success or grand buildings. It's love, family, community, all the things I left behind." Eleanor felt tears in her eyes. "Charles, He took her hands in his touch gentle but sure. "I know I hurt you when I left. I know I don't deserve a second chance. But if you'll have me, I want to stay. Here, in Snowberry Hollow. With you." Eleanor's mind raced. Part of her wanted to throw caution to the wind, to fall into his arms and never let go. But another part, the part that had been hurt before, held her back. "How do I know you won't leave again?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Charles reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Eleanor's breath caught as he opened it, revealing a delicate gold ring set with a single sparkling diamond. "Because this time," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "I'm asking you to marry me." Eleanor stared at the ring, then back at Charles, her heart pounding. "Charles, this is so sudden." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I know, and I don't expect an answer right away. I just want you to know that I'm serious about this, about us. I've loved you since the moment I met you, Eleanor Finch, and I'll love you for the rest of my days if you'll let me." Tears spilled down Eleanor's cheeks as she looked into Charles's eyes, seeing all the love and sincerity there. She thought about the lonely Christmases she'd spent without him, about the joy she'd felt seeing him again. She thought about the life they could build together, right here in Snowberry Hollow. Slowly, a smile spread across her face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Charles Granger, I will marry you." Charles's face lit up with joy as he slipped the ring onto her finger. Then he pulled her close, kissing her with all the passion of their years apart. As they broke apart, breathless and laughing, the clock in the hall began to chime midnight. "Merry Christmas, Eleanor," Charles murmured, resting his forehead against hers. "Merry Christmas, Charles," she replied, her heart so full it felt like it might burst. As the snow continued to fall outside and the village slept peacefully, Eleanor and Charles stood in each other's arms, knowing that whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. Christmas in Snowberry Hollow had always been magical, but this year, it had become something even more, a new beginning, a promise of love renewed, and the start of a beautiful journey together. In the years to come, Eleanor and Charles would often look back on that Christmas Eve as the moment their lives truly began. They would face challenges, of course, the struggles of merging their lives, of balancing Charles's architectural work with the demands of running the inn. But through it all, they would have each other, and the love that had brought them back together. And every Christmas, as they hung stockings by the fire and welcomed guests to Finch's hearth, they would remember the magic of that snowy night when love found its way home, proving that sometimes the greatest gifts are the ones that come wrapped not in paper and ribbons, but in the warmth of a rekindled flame and the promise of a shared future.